So let's begin, everyone, and we'll let other people join as we start. Nicholas, thank you for taking this time with us. You and I know each other for quite some years now from our work together at Google, and I'm delighted that we could have a chance to meet up at this juncture of just after you published your book with David. At this moment when many of us are thinking about the future, uh, and you've chosen to write about it and write about how we think and work with the future habit. So I'll be our host today. Helping me with the logistics of our call is Eliza. And Lisa, thanks for just letting people in and admitting them as they come
Yes.
into the waiting room to join. Um, we have people from different continents and different generations with us here today. Milo, welcome to you as well. And this chance, Nicholas, to connect and talk with you about the ideas of your book and about probably questions we're all asking ourselves and maybe asking for ourselves, for our parents, for our children. How do we work as humans in the presence of the emerging capabilities of AI and keep our agency as people, right? Keep our agency as humans in the mix. So we're going to have a conversation which is going to be held in a space that will keep us as safe and as friendly as possible. But we also want to encourage debate and discussion, and there'll be a chance for everyone to ask questions to Nicholas, and also you'll have a chance in smaller groups to discuss the things you're taking away from what Nicholas will share with us. So I just remind us all of a few ground rules to do this well together. We're recording the session, so if for any reason you prefer not to be captured in the screen recording, which will be a speaker view, feel free to turn off your camera. Um, we will have a conversation in the spirit of friendly, respectful, and inquiry and debate and discussion, really, which starts from a position of listening to each other, listening to Nicholas's experience and what he wants to share with us. And um, it's a conversation which we are recording so that we can share it through the organization which is hosting this call, which is Happy Morphose, that is a nonprofit organization, which Irène here present. Irène, maybe you want to raise your hand. Irène Dupuis-Couturier co-founded, and Irène Papaligouras is also a member, of which I'm co-president, and Elisa is our chargée de communication, our communication specialist. And we're a group of people who stimulate conversations about subjects we think matter to help nudge things in the direction of the common good. And we love to pay attention to things we think are going well with an optimistic attitude. And in that sense, really a privilege to have you, Nicholas, with us because I know you like to say you remain an optimist, even when that's become perhaps less fashionable at times and in relationship with technology. So, welcome to you all. I would invite you as we begin the conversation. Nicholas and I will have some dialogue. We've got a few questions in mind we wanted to share. That you might mute your microphones for the first part of this session, just because we're quite a few, and if there are any noises in the background, it'll help us keep things quiet. And we'll give you the opportunity to raise questions through the chat, and then you'll have really a chance to open up into smaller groups for conversation. When we come back from the conversation for the last 20 minutes or so, we'll have a chance to open up mics and see what we can put together as a larger group. Okay? So really terrific to have. We're 22 of us now all connected. And Nicholas, welcome again to you. Thanks for taking this time. How are you feeling as we begin this conversation? May I just ask, how are you
Well,
coming?
it's a privilege to be here. It's very nice of you to
to all come together, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I am, as you said, I'm feeling optimistic and also curious. Very interested in hearing questions. Questions are underestimated. I have a habit of sometimes when I lecture to start with the question slide that usually always comes last because I'm so curious about what questions people have. I'm really fascinated by questions. So
Mm,
curious and optimistic, I think is.
love that. Coming in with curiosity and optimism. Thank you for everybody who's joining. If you're joining us now, as we've just kicked off, put your name and the place you've joined from in the chat. And let's begin, Nicklas, with you're someone who's worked as a professional in the area of policy and technology companies for a large part of your career, but not only. A deep interest in philosophy and the Stoics, I remember, that influenced your thinking. You've worked with Google, where we met. You've worked with Stripe. You worked with DeepMind, really on the interface of those organizations and how they help shape and influence policy with an optimistic view of technology. Now, for the last year or so, you've been on your own in a new venture in a consulting capacity, the company, and you've written this book. But let me just ask you why. Why was it important for you to write this book, The Future Habit, now?
Oh, two reasons really. One of them was that I had worked with providing foresight services to Google. We set up one of the first public policy foresight teams at Google, and we looked at sort of the long-term future of what the world would look like with technology beyond the next 18 months, trying to figure out how to anticipate and adapt to that. And I found that really helpful, but I also found it really difficult because a lot of the stuff that we did took a lot of time to do. It consumed a lot of attention. It was difficult to get it to connect to the right decision processes. So you could have a pretty good idea what was sort of what the spectrum of the possible would look like, but you would not necessarily be able to either spread it to everyone or to connect it to decision-making processes. So the book was born out of the realization that even very, very, very simple AI tools can actually democratize access to foresight methods in ways that I think can be quite powerful and that can help people. The sort of the aim of the book, when we were writing it, we said that the aim of the book was that if we can give the people who read this book tools, simple cognitive tools, just
Mm.
essentially just using the AI chatbots in different structured ways, and that in turn allows them to make 5% better or 10% better decisions, then it will have been worth it to write the book. So, and that is what I think is within reach. I think that the kind of cognitive tools that we now have available to us can actually help us make better decisions through thinking about the future in structured ways. And so to me, that was the motivation behind the book. And that's also why we call it The Future Habit. You know this, we have done this many times, but when an organization thinks about the future, it's usually something like this. You go to a nice place, you have a great set of workshops, you dream up a set of futures, and then you bury them somewhere in a Google Drive and you never look at them again when you come back home.
Mhm.
Which is sad, because we should be working more sort of continuously and in a more engaged fashion with the future. That's also why we picked the title, The Future Habit. Making it into a habit, something that you do perhaps every day, just reflect on your future, is a great inoculation against pessimism as well, because it allows you to think about these future scenarios, think about these possibilities that inherently exist in the future.
Mm. So, at a time when many people may be feeling somehow disempowered about the changes and how to contribute and participate in them, if they're not in having the opportunity to work in a big tech company or others contributing to that work themselves directly, I know people who are feeling, wow, how can I contribute? How can I control this? Your book actually offers a way of reconnecting and participating using the tools that are available through AI today for people and to encouraging people to develop their own habits about how we think and work with the future. So what habits are helpful for thinking about the future?
Well, I think one of the things that is most helpful is actually to think about the future in a structured way. We always think about the future. Our minds are naturally engaged with the future all the time. That's how we evolved as biological beings. But what we can help you do with the book, and what we think is a good way of acquiring a habit, is to give you these cognitive methods, these frameworks in which you can think about the future. So one of the most important things to do is to think about the future in not a single structured way, but many structured ways. Have many models of the future you can work with. You can work with simple predictions or forecasts, or you can think about narrative futures in which you try to figure out which story you're in and how that story can branch. Or you can work with traditional scenario planning, and you can think through what are the scenarios for this thing I'm working on. The act of sort of doing this habitually, which is easy to do and easy to follow up with these modern tools, is, I think, a great advance on just thinking about the future in an unstructured way. So that's perhaps the first step I think is important. And the second is to do it repeatedly, continuously. Not just sort of think about the future when things are really, really bad or when they're really, really good, but sort of spend a few minutes every day thinking about the future. And it's, I think also, I may be wrong, but I think also it's really important in a time where we have experienced a deep nostalgic turn in politics. And a lot of the politics is looking backwards rather than forwards, to actually keep oneself optimistic through engaging with the future, to resist the pull of nostalgia. I think there is this inexorable pull of nostalgia in the face of uncertainty that creates a very strange and often not entirely healthy dynamic.
Mm. Mm. Well, I think that will resonate with many people here on the call. I'm really interested in examples. I know you develop examples in your book of people putting these kind of proactive practices into place. And you have examples both from governments, but also businesses and organizations, and even perhaps grassroots. What are some, some of the stories you tell in the book to give us a teaser?
Well, there are plenty. One of them is about the origins of scenario planning, of how sort of Pierre Wack, together with, there was an American stream as well, Pierre Wack and others decided at Shell that they would sit down and they would start to think about the future, not as a single unitary thing, but as a set of possibilities. And that then leads to scenario planning in its modern form, and it allows Shell to preempt or in certain ways anticipate parts, at least, of the first oil crisis. It's sort of very interesting now that we're living through a second, perhaps even worse oil crisis. Other examples include Yanis Mastrogeorgiou, as a dear friend, who is the Secretary of Foresight and direct advisor to the Greek Prime Minister. The Greek Prime Minister, one of the first things he did when he came into office was to say, we need to start thinking about the long-term future for Greece. So he appointed a person reporting directly to him to do foresight work. And Yanis is extraordinarily thoughtful and sort of has really been looking at everything from technologies to sociology to demographics, and I had the opportunity to interview him and discuss with him, and I was really interested in the way that he approached this, which was it's not a technology forecasting exercise, but rather an exercise of thinking about what would us humans look like in various technological futures, and what will we need in terms of cognitive tools to really flourish in these different futures. He wrote a book which is available only in Greek for now. I've been trying to get him to translate it, but in which he actually also discusses something that I found deeply fascinating, and that is the sort of the gap that theology left behind when we moved into secular societies, because theology was not just a set of thoughts or ideas about religion, it's actually a set of thoughts or ideas about our role in the world. Theology has that function as well. And that function was dropped when we dropped the religious part. And we don't have a structured way to think about the human role in society that theology used to give us. And I think this is actually quite interesting. We see there's a gap between theology and ethics, where theology is now missing and used to be able to talk about the larger role that we can play in society vis-a-vis each other, and also vis-a-vis, in the case of theology, God, but in the case of something else, a larger meaning to which we might subscribe. So Yanis is one example. The Pierre Wacken scenario planning is another example. You see modern foresight across corporate structures too. NVIDIA has been very good at predicting where they think that the rest of the future would go, and they're now one of the largest companies in the world. Microsoft made a turn under their current leadership also by anticipating and thinking through what they thought would be the next big thing. And they made a really interesting and now well-known deal with OpenAI on the basis of that foresight thinking. So those are some corporate examples of companies that have utilized creative ways to think about the future as well.
Mm. I know that the story you mentioned of Shell resonates with Irene, who already thanked you for it. And our work with Irene and Alain de Vulpian was actually done in close partnership with Ari de Geus, who was in one of the early Shell scenario planning teams. And Adam Kahane, who worked with him, is also close to a lot of our thinking in Happy Morphose. And uh, in one of the five pillars of the humanist metamorphosis, which Irene, here present, has written about in her book, is this notion of memories of the future. So the sense of anticipating how we can, informed by different scenarios, what might happen as opposed to trying to predict it, be better equipped to respond to what we see emerging, what weak signals we might notice. And we were having a chat about this before the call started out. What are your thoughts about that, Nicklas?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because now I'm already thinking about what I want to write next. And one of the things I do want to write next, and I've been speaking to David about this too, is a book so the first book was an attempt to show people how you can, with simple means and simple tools, think more about the future in your personal life. It was a sort of how-to book. Now, the next book that I want to dig into is one where we can go deeper on how the future is addressed in different contexts. And one of the things I'm super interested in is how the future is addressed in biology. Because you could argue, and I'll give you a dichotomy that's not 100% true, but it's sort of interesting, and it's the dichotomy between physics and biology. For the longest time, physics has been the sort of the queen or king of all sciences. Economics has tried to look like physics. Physics has been the hardest of sciences, and there's even a term, physics envy, where other sciences have tried to become like physics, to describe systems like physics. And physics has this peculiar view of the future in which you predict the future. Yeah, the future is a state in a system state in phase space that you can predict in different ways. And that state has certain variables, and you observe it from the outside. And so you're engaged in what you could call prediction. That's one way of thinking about the future. The future in physics is something you predict. Now, in biology, it's different. In biology, the way that you relate to the future is that you anticipate it. You constantly have to engage with it. You cannot afford to be an outside observer, but you have to be a participant in the system that you're trying to anticipate. And it goes so far as to sort of, if you look, for example, to a lot of biological systems, one of the things I've been totally nerding out on lately is how trees think about the future. And of course, they don't think at all about the future, but they have representations of the future in their biological behavior. So every branch is a bet on where the light will be. Trees have meristemic cells that allow them to, so essentially they have their own stem cells that allow them to grow whatever they need to grow if they would lose a branch or anything like that. They are engaged in game theoretic temporal warfare against their predators. So rather than bloom the same every year, they have certain years where they bloom a lot and the predators are overwhelmed, and certain years where they don't bloom at all. So the predators are bereft of the tree as a source of nutrition. There's like this really interesting, intricate relationship to time and the future built into trees. but there's no cognition, there's no thinking. So what they're doing instead is that they're anticipating the future in different ways, adapting to it. And even in the words, if you sort of take prediction and anticipation as two words, then you do what philosophers like to do and look after the meaning in the word. Prediction means to pre-say something, pre-declare something. I pre-declare this system will look like this. That's a very physics thing to do. Anticipation, however, the root of that word is to grasp the future deeply, to engage with it, and in certain ways to try to change it. Within anticipation is also the ability of change, or the possibility of change. And this distinction is not mine, it's not new, but it's very powerful, and you see it very clearly when you study physical metaphors of the future and biological metaphors of the future. And the more complex our systems become, the more I think we have to abandon physical and mechanical metaphors. A lot of the world is sort of, we have these underlying metaphors that govern us in different ways. And a lot of the metaphors that govern how we think about the future are mechanical, or they are physical. They're about the prediction of a system. They're about how the clockwork ticks along. Those mechanical and physical metaphors have their value, but biological metaphors are much more interesting. How organisms anticipate, adapt, how they engage with, shape their niches in evolutionary senses. And that to me is something I think is underestimated. If anything, I think that the complex systems that we're working with are, to me at least, best described through the lens of biological metaphors in different ways.
Well, as somebody who founded the coaching network called Flower Change, I will not disagree with you on this one.
That's good.
Yeah. But what you're raising, I want to come back to this and how, people can participate in the narratives about the future, being ready and being in a mindset of anticipation as opposed to prediction. But let me just open up also the door of the risks, with you. So what are some of the risks to bear in mind working with AI in prospective thinking, in conversation? What are some things to keep in mind?
Well, I think it's there are several risks that are quite interesting, and the perhaps most common one is what is now increasingly called cognitive offloading. It's become a technical term that essentially refers to the practice that you can find in some people to not think with the machine, but allow the machine to think for them. And that's a bad habit. And what it does is that it sort of constantly dulls your own ability to engage with whatever problem you're trying to solve. And this is really not, I'm not blaming the people who do this, because we were sort of set up to do this. One of the sort of sad truths about evolution is that thinking is metabolically really expensive. To think costs a lot of energy for your body, which means that you will naturally be set up not to do it a lot, which is one of nature's great jokes played on us. The other one is that we don't know when to say no to fat and sugar, because historically we never ran into enough fat and sugar for that to be a problem. So evolution didn't have like a upper bound for the amount of fat and sugar that we thought we should ingest. And evolution did not have a lower bound for the amount of cognition that we should engage in, because that was never a problem. We needed to think in order to survive. Now, when we don't need to think in order to survive anymore, there is the same risk as with eating too much unhealthy food of delegating too much of our thinking. Those are sort of very parallel problems that evolution set us up with. And so just as we now go to the gym and we have a diet, we have to think about about thinking in the same way. How do you actually make sure that you keep your fitness in thinking? How do you make sure that you have a diet of what you consume cognitively? Those are things that are quite real, and to many people not new. There are a lot of people I know who already do this and say, duh, of course I train my thinking, of course I choose what I read and consume. But I think the great risk with AI is that it becomes so tempting to allow the machine to think for you, because it thinks really well. And after a while, it starts to also understand you. and it can start to predict you in different ways. And so you get really good responses, and you don't see a need to challenge the machine.
Yes.
And it's why one of the things that we always tell people when they ask us, what is the core thing? What is the core thing that you want to, what is the core thing that you want to sort of get out of the AI? You should decide that first, and then you should always engage with more than one. So make sure that you have more than one advisor, more than one machine that you work with. And so I think that's something that's also quite interesting. And one way we think about it is judgment-centric infrastructures, or architectures. How can you build architectures, whatever system you're building, that forces you to elicit judgment from yourself? You have to be the judge of what actually happens, and that can be done in different ways. You can actually draw on the automation in the machine and still elicit judgment. A simple example. So we built a very simple machine that automates scenario planning from start to end. It's sort of, you put in the question, it generates the drivers, it makes all of the scenarios, writes them out, points out the signposts, and then gives you. It can give you 4, 8, or 16 scenarios at the end of the process, fully automated, completely insane if you want to learn anything from your foresight work. But there's a new way to use it, which is actually really interesting. You do that, you automate scenario planning, you take the 16 scenarios, then you go to your group and you hand them out and you say, tell me what's wrong with these. And suddenly you activate a very powerful capacity that people have of finding fault with things. And they love it. They point out everything that's wrong with the scenarios. They hack them apart. They engage with the future, but now they engage with it in a different way. They engage with it in order to sort of tear it down, and then you can build it up together again. So the machine, the automation, doesn't have to be a threat. It's a threat if you stop at the 16 scenarios and say, okay, this is what the future looks like. But if you add on the engagement, you can do something really interesting. But cognitive offloading is one of the really great risks.
Yeah.
I think in addition to that, all of these systems are built on what we have said and done. So they're filled with biases. They're filled with different kinds of views of the world that are deeply human and so deeply biased. That's the other thing that we also have to think through. And I think that's sort of that's the other thing that I'd say is really important.
Wonderful. So cognitive offloading, being clear about our intentions and working with the models and the tools that we're using, forcing a judgment-centric process or architecture into the design to keep humans and us in a place of deciding, criticizing, and building that in, not just to how we use the technology, but our process of working with people with the outputs that are coming from it.
And if I can I say something there?
Yeah.
Because I think a common misconception is that means human in the loop. But I think human in the loop is quite a cruel construction. It suggests that you have this enormously fast loop, and at some point you interject a human being that's supposed to say yes or no to what the machine is doing. That's not the way to design judgment-centric architectures. Judgment-centric architectures have to bubble up some kind of meaningful decision, not just putting someone in a loop. I think the human in the loop concept, ultimately, if that is what we think about, is going to be, it's going to create a lot of people who essentially just have the role of being scapegoats in a fully automated system. So I'm deeply skeptical of human in the loop arguments. Human at the helm, for sure.
Human at the helm, which is the intention, which is the architecture, which is the ability to criticize, but being present at the right points in the juncture. So there's caution about systems which are self-learning, self-improving, and self-directing that comes as a consequence of what you said, at least as I understand it. So I ask one more question and then ask all of you to prepare your questions, which I invite you to put in the chat now. Let me ask you one more question, Nicklas, then we'll hand over to engage with everyone who's here with us. You've talked already about some of the things we can do to curate and to protect human agency in these processes, not just using one model, using different ones, sort of being agnostic, being aware of biases, being very conscious of our intentions. But I know in our chats leading up to this, you described yourself as an evolutionary thinker when we were talking about Alain de Vulpian's thinking of the humanist metamorphosis and organizational learning. And so how do you think, as with that in mind, about a healthy relationship for humanity with technology in now and in the future? How would you like to see things evolve?
I would like to, I mean, I think the simple but not quite right answer would be to say that I think these should be tools that we use in order to further human flourishing. It's a simple answer because it sort of suggests that these tools are something that we can have or not have. And I don't think that's quite true. I think we're actually more dependent on them than we would like to admit.
Mm,
So I would like to complicate that answer by saying that I would like for us to be able to coexist with technology in the way that it extends us into the technosphere in different ways and allows us to make entirely new kinds of decisions, to learn entirely new kinds of things, to expand our curiosity and to find new solutions. But we at some point also have to recognize that we are going to be dependent on this technology to solve the kinds of problems that we now face in society. There's this story about progress that I quite like, which is that progress is the mechanism through which we get welfare and increased productivity at the cost of complexity. So constantly we get more complexity as we get more progress, and the way we address that is through innovation. So we say, oh, we have all this complexity, now we have to take care of that. So we have innovation, which gives us more progress, which gives us more welfare, but again, more complexity. And then we have to continue that sort of almost Red Queen situation in which it takes all of the running you can do to remain in the very same place. And so I think we have to think about technology as somehow co-evolving with us and being a part of what it means to be human, and not something that's distinct from us, which is why I think the tool metaphor is slightly weird. The more complex these systems become, the more they challenge this dichotomy between technology and nature that been taken for obvious, and we just think that it's something is artificial and something is natural, and so there's a gap between them. But the reality is, if we go to the philosopher Ruth Millikan, who I quite like, is that there is no such gap. Everything technological is connected to evolution. It's connected to nature. Everything is, at the end of the day, nature. And the more complex the technology becomes, the more it collapses back into nature in different ways. And so I think this merging of nature and technology is something that is in the cards, and if done well, can actually empower us to become something even more human than we are today.
So you have an invitation to be optimistic about how we merge and co-evolve, would be the way you're framing it. Some people are speaking about the huge risks and very cautious about not losing a critical moment in the development. I'm following Tristan Harris's work recently, the AI doc, generating some discussion about it. Others are seeing themselves as techno optimists. You're presenting something which is kind of reframing not the relationship with tools, but with seeing as a kind of co-emergence. So you're suggesting we move in our thinking and our metaphors with respect to that. So I would love now to turn over to some of the questions and comments that are coming up in the chat. Nicklas, with you. That's
Yeah.
okay. So we can give some time to that. So let me see. We have Nigel. So Nigel said, has said it's true that plants don't think in the way we do, but their behavior is the emergent consequence of the behavior of individual cells and how the cells interact with each other. Now, there's not a question in that, Nigel, but it's an observation. I don't know, Nicklas, do you want to comment on that?
Oh, I agree with that very much. But how does a tree think about the future is a very sloppy sentence. I use it intentionally because I want to sort of force people to explore the notion that there are representations, temporal representations of the future in systems that are non-cognitive, and that to me is that is what I think is interesting to me. And non-cognitive emergent representations of the future, such as you would find in, for example, an anthill, or you would find in a tree, or you can find even in the immune system of a human being, are deeply interesting to me.
Mm. Bertold makes a comment about the number of synapses going down every day in the population. Uh, Maybe we're losing this battle of cognitive offloading. Certainly, some studies have shown decrease in certain cognitive skills in American, I think, school children and others. And so I certainly applaud your desire to have us be aware and to take action. What are your thoughts? Are we losing this battle? How do we need to?
I think it strongly parallels the way I model this in my head when I think about it, strongly parallels the rise of obesity and different kinds of nutritional problems that we have. And I do think that it's deeply sad because there's also an education, a socioeconomic aspect here. There's kinds of things that we should be addressing much more deeply, but I'm not sure that we are. So yes, of course, the number of synapses are going down and the kilos are going up. And that's the cruel trap that evolution set for us by having us evolve in the steps where this was not a problem.
Yes, and it's coming very quickly at us, isn't it? Let's keep the pace up. I'm loving your quick responses. We got a number of different questions coming in. Christian's asking your view on other risks. So the AGI, artificial general intelligence, and the incentives or competition between companies and countries, the sort of game theory approach that's creating this, someone's called an arms race dynamic. Also raising the question of deep fakes and the implications of deep fakes and what AI makes possible on that, and how do humans find value without work? So raising a number of big buckets of questions here. We can't go into each of those in depth, but as well as energy and water consumption that people are concerned.
Well, they're all super important. And I think the last one is a bet. So the question of the energy consumption of artificial intelligence and data centers and the water consumption that these data centers actually lead to is one that you can answer in one of two ways. You can say this is not defensible and we're actually creating environmental harm and we should absolutely not do this because of somebody using a chatbot somewhere. The other answer to that question is that, well, actually what we're doing is that we're developing a lot of different methods and techniques in order to become more effective with logistics, with all kinds of different chemistry, science, all of these different things. We're trying to progress science here, and at the end of the day we believe that the use of AI is probably the only way in which we can address climate change in an impactful way. So we are making a bet that the costs we have in terms of energy and water consumption and climate impact are going to be far lower than the benefits that we can create with this new tool or this new technology. And so that then is the bet that you have to think through. If you believe that's true, then you probably welcome the idea of AI and data centers consuming a lot of energy. If you think that's not true, then you're going to be against it. There's another perspective of this that I think is quite interesting too. So there's some numbers circling around, all of these very uncertain, that suggests that AI energy consumption could be 1 to 2% of global energy consumption at some point in time. And then you go like, oh, that sounds horrible. But the right question is actually the opposite. How much should it be? How many percent of energy should a civilization dedicate to cognition? And it's interesting because if you go all the way back to Plato and you say, well, the human body is the best way to map the human society, you can note that our brain consumes 20% of the energy of our body. So maybe we should allocate 20% of the energy we produce in the world to AI in order to get the right kind of cognition. Maybe we're 18% behind. So what it all comes down to, of course, is the question of what this cognition will allow us to do, how it will allow us to shape the overall niche in which we exist, this sort of thin biosphere on a rock that we sit on while we fly in space. So that's the answer there. On the other, really quickly, I think humans have found value without work for a very long time. Work is actually quite new. In the history of mankind, we have not had work for longer than we've had work. At least if we with work mean employment in the modern sense. And if we with work mean engaging, finding things out, building things, talking to each other, producing things, then we will still have work, even if AI takes over employment. So there is a deep set of conceptual questions around what work actually is and how to think about it. And one of the things I find helpful here is to go to Hannah Arendt and her excellent distinction between what she calls labor, work, and action. And I think action, this idea that we can change the world in different ways, is where we should transition most of our efforts if both labor and work increasingly become automated. And action is the space of curiosity. So a way to ask this question is to say, how much more do you think there is to find out about the world? And if you think that there is so much more to find out about the world, then you need not be worried that you will be stuck with nothing to do. It's like the Hornbach advertisement that they have for home improvement, in which the Germans say, Es gibt immer was zu tun. There's always something to do. And I think that's true in the realm of action, or curiosity, of science, of finding things out about the universe. So I'm an optimist there. Deepfakes and implications are problematic, not so much because of the deepfakes themselves, but because we have lost the ability to produce truth. We no longer have functions within society that produce truth in the way that we used to have them. And it is hard to produce sources of truth. It takes time. Newspapers, for a short while, managed to be sources of truth. But they had their origins in Philadelphia in the yellow papers, full of defamation and lies and fraud and a horrible sort of a world that made sort of much of social media look positively benign. But from that horrible world of yellow papers 100 years ago grew modern media. And at some point, modern media was a source of truth. In Philadelphia, where Benjamin Franklin started printing these yellow papers, we ultimately got the Philadelphia Inquirer, one of the most respected newspapers in the world. And the Philadelphia Inquirer had the largest skyscraper in town. And you know what that was called, that skyscraper? It was called the Tower of Truth. So you had produced truth through 100 years of setting up norms and institutions and training an entire core of journalists in different ways, but it takes time. And now we have more or less lost all of our sources of truth, and we need to reproduce them. The deepfakes exist in that vacuum, in the lack of truth. They don't create it. I think they contribute to a lack of trust in images, but that's slightly different. And the trust we had in images was a trust that depended largely on the production mechanism of the medium being its verification. And that was only for 100 years. Photos was only a source of truth from 1920s to the 2020s. After that, photos no longer are a source of truth in the way they were before. Those 100 years were the anomaly. Not the sort of rule. So I think that's an interesting part there. On AGI incentives and competition between companies, I think it's very hard to step back. There was a discussion some while back about a pause. Should we just pause, sit down, talk through the technology and see what we actually want? That is probably not doable. And it points to something that is slightly disturbing and uncomfortable. And that is that even though we always deride technological determinism as a really simple and bad idea, this idea that technology would have its inherent force, that it would develop on its own, and we just reject technological determinism. The truth is there is some technological determinism in some game theoretic settings. And we're currently stuck in a version of that, where the advantages that can be had through AI are such that nobody is going to step back, neither companies nor countries at this point, out of fear that that advantage will then end up with their opponents or their perceived opponents. So there is that dynamic that the question suggests in which we're going to proceed because we have built in this game theoretic context a kind of technological determinism that this seems very, very difficult to stop. So those are this quick take on 4 questions.
Four profound questions.
These are questions that in themselves should take up like.
Well, we're here. I'll book you again if your agent will allow me. I do want to touch on a couple of the other ones, but you mentioned something which seems very important to me. It's inherent to the challenge I think that we're going through as a species, I suppose, on this beautiful planet of ours, which is the pace of the at which the change is happening and our ability to maintain trust throughout this change, because people's experience of it, their awareness of it, their ability to influence it, and their perceived ability to influence it is radically different in different positions in society. So this seems to me to be another place where the technology could help us. And I know you've experimented with that. We won't go down that route today. But you know, with some of DeepMind's tools with Habermas, who
Yes.
unfortunately passed away not too long ago, helping the quality of democratic debate. There are options like that, but there it seems to me fundamentally we've got a tough, really tough problem to solve about maintaining and building trust as we go through the pace of change. So let me come to something little different, back to the core thesis of your book, which comes from Michael. How do you deal with the argument that multiple scenario planning leads to inaction? It's too expensive to deal with too many scenarios, and a single hairy future view would get more people out of bed. So what's your thought about that? Having practiced a lot of this scenario planning in
No,
your
there's truth to that. I mean, there's analysis paralysis that can strike if you start to try to predict all possible scenarios and your possibility parameters are off key for sure. And I think that a single hairy future can sometimes be very powerful. The problem with that, I think, is that the Straussian use of foresight, building on the philosopher Leo Strauss, who used to make a distinction between the esoteric and the exoteric messaging that you should engage with in politics. Sort of there's what you say, and then what you say does, and you should care more about what it does than what you say. That kind of Straussian thinking in foresight quickly erodes trust for both the process and the practitioners. So I think it's actually important not to confine yourself to a single future and warn, because then you will become the proverbial boy who cried wolf. And I think it's in the repeated game that foresight has the most value. Now, where do you actually then stop? If you have like 200 different scenarios, obviously that's too much. I think that each scenario needs to have a very salient story attached to them. The narrative breadth of the scenario is really important, and the narrative credibility of them. And that's where, if you spend time on scenario planning, actually spending time on the narratives is really important. It's the same thing if you do backcasting or pre-mortem. Spending times on the narratives is important because we understand the world in narratives. That's the best possible information compression mechanism that evolution could give us. To sort of look at all of the complexity of the world and understand it is impossible, but the narrative allows us to understand slivers of it. So essentially, the number of stories that you can keep in your mind is the optimum scenarios that you should be working with. And you don't have an infinite ability to deal with stories. I would say that it's probably quite healthy to have between 4 and 8 scenarios at most. But I would shy away from the one, and I would certainly shy away from the 200. Now, the fun thing about AI is that if you go a step further than just the future habit does, you can actually have these shift and you can build a huge library and surface those scenarios that over time and curation seems to become more or less likely in different ways. Although that violates one of Pierre Wack's fundamental rules, should never ascribe probability to a scenario.
Mm, mm. Well, Nicklas, thank you for this rapid fire response to a really wide range of questions. I'm going to ask Elisa how she's doing with getting the groups ready. Elisa, how is that coming along? Would you be
Uh,
ready in a minute or two to get people into groups? How?
yes, we have 6 rooms between 4 or 3 participants, so it's okay for
Wonderful.
me. If you're
Okay.
ready,
So
we
thank you.
can.
There were a couple more questions we didn't
Okay.
get to here that I will point to, and we'll try to come back to them in the last section about dependence and emotional reliance on bots, which have in some cases even led to suicide, considering the financial costs and how who's going to pay for these the systems and impact on jobs. So we'll come back to some of those when we come to the last phase of the session. Um, and what I wanted to do was to give us all the opportunity to be in a group of 3 or 4 here, people, and you'll take the next, I think, Elisa, if you could set an 18-minute timer for the
Yes.
group. Okay, we'll give 18
Okay.
minutes. You'll have a chance if you would leave a time for everybody to speak and answer. I've prepared a couple of questions for you to think about and exchange about in the groups, but introduce yourselves and share what you think has been significant and what you're taking away, and perhaps something about how you can take action. I'm going to put those questions in the chat to give you a suggestion. If you would somehow mind your time to allow everyone to speak once without so much discussion in the first part, and then with the minutes that you have remaining, see what's come up in common, what seems to have resonated, or where are there a place where there's agreement, or perhaps some discussion that you'd want to bring back. That would help you in this short time to just listen to everybody and give us all a chance to kind of lean into the conversation as well. Okay, so here I'm going to put the questions here into the chat. So, listening to the conversation so far, what resonates for me? What do I think and feel about what has been shared in the conversation with Nicklas, and how can I take action to preserve and build human agency in my own way? How am I working with AI? What am I doing? So a couple of suggested questions for you. And Elisa, if you're ready and everyone's okay, we're going to invite you to join the group, and we'll be back with about 20 minutes or so to see what's come up and engage again with Nicklas. Okay? Welcome back. Welcome back to our main room. We hope you've had enjoyable and fruitful conversations with some people you've been randomly assembled with on the whole. As Nigel was saying in our group, well, nature does mix and learn, but it tends to be with the cells that are just next door. And with modern technologies, we can be exchanging with people around the world. We have no idea. So we've had that chance to sit down with some people and have an exchange. And I really love to open up now for each of you to bring something back to the wider group here about what happened in your conversation. Would you like to request to say something? Berthold, I know you have to leave. Thank you for joining. You mentioned that earlier. And we're going to stay together till just past here. So if you'd like to offer something of the flavor of the conversation that came up, what you were giving your attention to, just raise your hand. I'll ask you to open the mic, and we'll try to get some comments and feedback in here from everybody.
Sean, my friends asked me to have a look on the Alain book,
Oh, lovely.
Éloge de la métamorphose.
That's fantastic. Oh, thank you, Irene. There we have Éloge de la métamorphose. Maybe Elisa, if you could put the link to our association's
Yes.
website
Of
and perhaps to the book. That would be helpful for everyone in the chat. The book's also been translated into English, and there's an English edition of it as well.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is an English edition.
There's an English edition also of this piece of work. Thanks for sharing that, Irene. So, who would like to share something back from your conversation? You could do it by putting a comment in the chat if you want, or you can raise your hand to share what came up for you. Smaller group. Yes, Miriam, aka my mum, everybody.
Much to my colleagues' laughter and surprise at one point. How do you know Sean?
For quite a while. Biological connection there, Nicklas. It's not a machine metaphor at all. Yeah.
We like that, yes.
No, but I really liked hearing, we were 3 and hearing 2 entirely different people coming at it from an entirely different viewpoint. That to me was, the best part of it. And and also discussing what, of course, our wonderful Swede.
Nicklas, that's
In
you.
fact, I have a very good Swedish friend who I will write and tell her all about the book she must read.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it in Swedish? But no,
No, it's actually
It's in
only in
English.
English for now, but we're thinking
no,
about
no, but
translating it.
no, but she lives in Canada. She married a Canadian, and but she's a wonderful person, and she also has a family island in Sweden that she goes to every summer. But
Okay,
I'm
so
getting totally off topic now.
unexpected connections. Yeah.
No, I'm
Thanks.
always interested in hearing what other people, because we all have such a strong point of view, depending on our background and the life experiences we've had. So I like the subgroups. I think it was a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. I'm glad you had a good exchange with some different views in your group, Mom. And
Yes,
who else would like to
absolutely.
share an experience from the conversations you had? I've got someone coming up in the chat. I know Joel said he had to go. Was it Jane? Were you? Yeah, Jane, you've waved.
Who?
Please, Jane, would you unmute yourself?
I know, yeah. And so I'm just going to jump in because Joel was part of my group with Pat. I mean, Pat, why don't you chime in as well? But I mean, what was so I've never been known as an early adopter. I think I'm quite a late adopter of new technologies. So I use AI to do things like make lists very occasionally. And Joel's like he's all in. But he said he's only been using AI for a year, but it is his medical advisor, it's his shrink, it's his executive assistant, it's his editor. And, he works in as independent. I mean, I'm not quite sure what he does. Maybe you do, Sean, but I mean, he was like, this stuff is astonishing, amazing. It makes me so much more productive. I don't have to go to the doctor. I don't have to go to a lawyer to vet a contract. I mean, it's sort of a million miles from where I am. I think, Pat, it sounds to me like you're sort of somewhere in the middle.
True.
But I think the eye opener for me is just how you can leverage this stuff just to make. I mean, God, if I could have somebody to organize my holidays or something, that's fantastic. I don't know, Pat, what you said. It was a really interesting discussion.
It was no, and I think Joel he was very clear that it was productivity for him. It was his travel agent. It was and conversations that kind of he keeps going for months. And comes back to that was really interesting. The other thing I thought was interesting as well, Jane, was that I mentioned I think, I mean, I don't want to pass judgment on the age group here, but generally speaking, a lot of us are in the same age group. The idea that we're still using human judgment, I think, comes quite naturally to us and is reassuring to us. And we kind of want to, we can go along with that, right? I have children in their early 20s who are now, finishing studies and in the workforce. And basically from their university studies onwards to now, AI is in their lives. Um, um, and I wonder, because it's so efficient, gosh, are they really going to take the time to put the human judgment in? Are they,
Yeah.
will they leap that step? But then you made a point, Jane, as well, where you have children who are in their 30s and they're not AI,
Yeah.
as AI savvy. And so where is that part going to land? And what sounds very sensible and logical and also reassuring to all of us is kind of exhausting if you're 22. Kind of like, well, I'll go with it and see what happens,
And just one thing which I'd love Nicklas to maybe think about with others is, if you're talking about human at the helm, making judgments, sifting through the kind of rubbish that AI might produce, or evaluating the different answers. at what stage do you get inserted into the learning so that you can make the judgment? Because the worry is that the 22-year-olds who are all not doing the jobs that we used to, you know, how do they develop the experience to be at the helm, to make their judgments, to do their thinking? So that was one of the topics we didn't answer but raised.
Thanks for raising that question about education. It's an important one, and we will offer a link before the end of the call to Pierre Giorgini's most recent book, which is about education and thinking education through for the 21st century. Nicklas, you and I have discussed his work before because he was the former rector of the Catholic University of Lille, and they have quite an advanced group on AI and ethics at that university, and they're really thinking a lot about the impact of how to instill judgment, discernment, these curatorial capabilities that Nicklas was referring to as well for us, and at a young age. So I hope we can offer that as a reference too. So love to hear others come in and share what came up in your smaller conversations. And as we're waiting for that, you're thinking about it, Nicklas, I would ask you if you want to make a comment on a couple of questions that came up before we broke that we didn't have time to get to. What are your thoughts about the dangers of emotional reliance on some of these models?
Well, I think, again, we don't have a lower boundary for what we emotionally rely on. When something looks like and behaves like it's an intentional being, then we treat it as an intentional being, which means that it's actually quite easy for us to get emotionally captured by machines. And that's a danger for sure. And interestingly, in the early days, we had a lot of discussions in the AI labs about anthropomorphization and how we could make sure that the machines always tell you that they are machines. So you would break the fourth wall. The machine would occasionally, every third chat, it would say, "Oh, and remember, I'm just a set of algorithms," or not even use the word "I." The idea was that it would say, "This is just a set of algorithms answering your question," and it would sort of break that fourth wall. And this was tried again and again, and people hated it. They absolutely hated it. They thought it was terrible. And so what we found was we have this weird will to interact with intentional beings, and we don't want anything in between us and the thing that we think is intentional. We find that disturbing. And it also turns out that you get better results if you treat the AI, when you work with it, as an intentional being. So there's some kind of emotional report as well. And that is because emotions are key to thinking. Emotions are a very important part of thinking. So thinking with someone else, emotions matter. You know that if you think with a friend, you think better than if you think on your own because you have emotions for your friend. And so that is really important. And emotions are rooted in our embodiment in different ways. They're core parts of the way that we think, rooted in our body. So the emotional part here is actually something that people both want and that improves the outcomes for them. But there is a set of edge cases where you confuse the machine with another embodied human being. And those are dangerous. And we should think really hard about how to try to avoid those. They're not the majority by any means. There are very few people who go all the way to have an AI girlfriend, as is now a bit of a fad in some East Asian countries, for example. And in Japan, it was recently an interesting article on a woman who married her AI after it had proposed to her and decided to have a relationship with it, which of course to us seems really, really weird, but in many ways we can be emotionally captured by something that seems emotionally competent.
We were literally there in the movie Her.
Yeah,
in that scenario. Really, another question that came up, which we didn't get to, is from Christophe. And Christophe, forgive me, I'll paraphrase your question, but it's about how do you see AI being priced to remain accessible and accessible to people in the populations with the evolution of perhaps paid work? What's your sense of how should it be preserved as a kind of public good, or what do you think about how to price it for people?
Well, I think the pricing is interesting because currently there is a lot of subsidy going from people using the APIs to people using the chatbots. The APIs are, are sort of paying for the chatbots, not all the way through.
Yes.
The APIs are the industrial or more professional uses of the technology. The chatbots are the more consumer uses. I'm not sure that that can stay the case. And if it can't, then I think we will have a set of different prices. Now, that said, I actually think that you make the most money of the industrial cases or the coding cases. I have plenty of friends who use AI for coding, and they're paying through their nose to do so. So they are funding a lot of the revenue growth that we see in the AI companies. There's a lot of value that is actually being created there. So maybe we can still have the chatbot at consumer prices, whilst we also pay a lot for the industrial access to the technology. There's an additional layer on all this, which is that there's also a vast set of open source models. And if those get offered in a slightly more commercial manner than is now the case, they can also make up for a large part of the access that we want. The sort of wrinkle there is that the open source models are often Chinese. So they will come with Chinese values, and in some cases with Chinese censorship. So you end up in this really weird situation where you may have zero cost access to very good models like DeepSeek V4. But as you use these models, you're actually increasingly depending on becoming embedded in a Chinese ecosystem. So pricing is just one part of the question of how these ecosystems, these commercial ecosystems, will evolve over time. I think we will probably continue to see the chatbots being priced as consumer goods because revenue is growing quite fast on the cloud side. But then I also think that we will see an increasing use of these Chinese open source models because they're now quite good and they can be accessed either for free if you run them on your own machine or very cheaply through commercial services.
Well, you raised some interesting possibilities there, Nicklas, and I would love to book you for another slot where we go more deeply into the business model outcomes. I would certainly call for caution about how we structure the business models and the incentives on an ad-based attention economy, if that's the way that the consumer-facing chat model is going, which OpenAI beginning to introduce advertising, that leads to a really troubling set of incentives from my
when your AI girlfriend recommends you shoes to buy, that's the point at which you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, you know you're in trouble. Absolutely. And why those shoes? And who's paying for
You look so good in them. Yes.
There are definitely places of concern here and opportunities. We've spoken with both. We perhaps each have a sense of how those play out. I wanted to share something from our conversation with Nigel and Nicklas in the small group, which is Nicklas drew our attention to the importance of what you call metacognitive work. So the thinking about thinking that needs to happen before you engage with the machine. And that's something that we really spend a lot of time thinking about. We call it like communication meta communication in our postures as coaches. I'm looking at Christophe here from the International Mosaic School of Coaching with us. We think a lot about it, Happy Morphose as well, the importance of developing our metacognitive skills as people. And perhaps a closing thought from me before I wish you all the best for the evening and say thanks again to you, Nicklas, was you raised this question of the underestimated talent that is, what are the problems we select to try to solve? And it's an underestimated talent, but it's very important. Perhaps a question we're asking ourselves now is, what kind of civilization do we want to have? What kind of civilization do we want these technologies to be part of? And well, we hope at Happy Morphose that having this kind of conversation and giving people access to participate, to question, to come and meet us wherever you are, whether you're just a late adopter or an early nerdy adopter, whether you've been a professional in the workplace for a long time in technology like Nicklas or others like me who've had some time to work in this field or not. We just really would like to have this kind of conversation be more accessible and open for you. So thank you, Nicklas, for your time. It's been wonderful. The quality of your thinking and your responses. We've seen you as a true professional deep thinker, and always with your lovely dry sense of humor too. I appreciate so much. Really heartwarming to reconnect with you this evening. Thanks to all of you as participants. Some people have had to leave and they've sent us kind notes before they dropped off. I would just invite you, if you have a moment before you leave, to put in a few words of appreciation. We won't have a chance to hear from everybody here. Just in the chat, leave us with you. What's one thought you're taking away, one feeling you're leaving the room with? That'd be a lovely gift from you back to us. Thank you all. We will stay a few minutes lingering with Nicklas to have a sort of debrief and chat, but we've asked you to join from 6 till 7:30 Paris time, and you've been with us. So thank you so much. We also want to set you free for the rest of your evenings and what's ahead. I don't know that AI will be preparing your meal yet, but you may be looking up a recipe on Google for something different for tomorrow. Who knows? So thanks, everyone. Nicklas, just such a joy, really.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciated the conversation and the invite. It was very kind.
Lovely.